My name is Ameen Ashraf and I'm a foreign Pakistani, and I would like to share with you about the scaling of renewable energy. So I've written a document. I've been thinking about renewable energy for a long time. I've been collecting information about it, and renewable energy has been a challenge for every country in the world. Although it seems very, an interesting idea that you could get energy from the sun, but the scaling has been a problem. So I've tried to address that in this document that I've written called Scaling Renewable Energy, the Application of Labor Power to Strategic Infrastructure. I want to go through this document to explain my ideas about how this could be achieved in poorer countries with lots of people, with lots of population, such as Pakistan, when even Germany and other countries were unable to scale it so far. Most of the time when people try to think about scaling renewable energy, they think about a capitalist way of doing it. So the government subsidizes the project and everybody gets interested, and companies and corporations come in and they want to participate because there's a chance to make money. But then when the subsidy dries up, those companies sort of lose interest and things get stopped. So I propose there should be a different way that we should approach the problem. Basically, I propose that NGOs and governments need to work together to come up with a plan where you can use the massive amount of labor that is available in countries like Pakistan or Turkey or other Muslim countries, for example, to basically scale this. I call this whole concept the labor power. Pakistan has labor power, and how this can be used. Basically, the idea is, first, you have one component of the labor power which would be the employed laborer. So people who need a job, the government creates a kind of a program and small factories, and the people get trained in making the components that the government experts have decided are needed. So they make the components. They go through a bit of training program, and then they start making the components. When those components are installed, suppose they make solar panels. When the solar panels are installed, they start generating electricity, and that electricity is sold in the market. Then a fraction of that revenue from that sold electricity is going to be used to pay the employees in this model. So the employee has two sources of income. Basically, they have a government salary and a revenue coming from the sale of the electricity coming out of the components that they generate. But the overall salary remains constant. So over time, as they produce more and more units, more and more of their income is basically coming from the sale of electricity until they're completely getting all their salary from the sale of the electricity. In the meantime, when the liberated funds that the government was using to employ the person can now be used to employ another person. And then if they have the right kind of, this is all the kind of profit sharing agreement, the government would have to, do that. And this person, after their salary is coming from the sale of the electricity exclusively, every additional unit that they produce is now producing more revenue that can be used to hire another, the value can be transferred to hire another employee. So the government can only spend so much money on this thing. Along with that, I think government NGOs should be involved in recruiting people, recruiting the population to basically volunteer their time, because Pakistanis have lots of people and they have time. Lots of people have lots of time as well. So in that, the way they do that is, if we, for example, if we could recruit 1% of Pakistani population to start participating in donating their labor and their time, and if they give maybe 6 hours a day about twice a month, so maybe every other weekend, just 6 hours. So when you do the math if you have 220 million people, and let's say they give 6 hours every other week for about 25 weeks, but we only have 1% of the 220. So you have 2.2 million people, volunteers, that give 6 hours about twice a month. When you do the math on that, that's about 330 million labor hours in those 25 weeks. So in 1 year, in less than a year, you're getting 330 million labor hours worth of contribution out of these people, out of the volunteers. And so when we come, what does that mean? How do we equate that to productivity? Well, if we take a factory of 1,000 workers that are working 8 hours a day for 365 days of the year, their output is about 3 million labor hours. So when we compare the volunteer 1% Pakistanis who volunteer their labor, in 1 year they can do about 100 times more contribution, labor contribution, compared to a 1,000-person factory working 8 hours a day every single day without stopping. So if that factory was operational for 100 years continuously without a single day off, and without any employee leaving the workforce, their contribution would equal to the 1 year output of the volunteers, the way I've described it. So this is the latent power that exists in this untapped labor that exists in Pakistan. And we need to figure out how to recruit people. Now, Pakistan has lots of NGO organizations who are doing lots of charitable work and doing all kinds of good things, like having sewing program for women. Those things are producing low value things that don't have a demand, like souvenir shops and other things. They don't really have a demand in international market. But if that labor can be redirected, and volunteer labor can be redirected to produce something of a much higher value, such as energy, then Pakistan has the potential to, within a decade, to not only satisfy its own energy needs, but surpass that and make the energy price go negative. And this is going to have an even bigger, so this is going to be similar to, imagine the Gulf countries who were energy poor, or they were basically labor poor, energy poor, they were overall poor. But when energy reserves were discovered there in the 60s or so, they shot up, and they are now some of the richest countries in the world. A small little country like Qatar, because of the fact that they have oversupply of energy compared to what their needs are, they have become enormously wealthy by selling that energy. Well, Pakistan can achieve the same result by using its labor power. We don't have gas reserves, but we have labor power. And now, for the first time, we could exploit, redeploy this labor in the appropriate way to overproduce the energy. Within a decade, Pakistan's price of electricity could go to zero and even negative, just like it was demonstrated in Germany. In Germany, they had some wind power projects in certain cities where on the weekends when the factories are shut down, the wind blows so strongly that there's so much power is generated that the price of electricity becomes negative. And the government urges the citizens to please use the electricity because they have no storage capacity. So these little experiments all over the world have already proven this is possible. Now it is a challenge to use the labor power to basically organize the labor and use the labor power that Pakistan has to achieve the same result on a massive scale. And what are the after effects? Well, when you make the energy price go negative or close to zero, even if it's positive, all the factories in the world will relocate to Pakistan, which are going to in turn create millions of factory and well-paying jobs. Just like in the previous decades, Western corporations moved their production to China because of cheap labor, and China became an industrial powerhouse because of that. The same thing can happen here. When you have a low cost of labor and low cost of energy, which is one of the input costs for every type of production from the beginning of man's presence on Earth, it's going to stimulate all the factories, all the big companies who want to beat their competitors to relocate to that area. So just imagine if you could suddenly give these factories, if Pakistan could announce tomorrow that we have free electricity for any factory that wants to open up their factory or production line here. It's gonna make the country will be inundated by factories, and there may not be enough laborers to supply enough humans to work in those factories. This is just one consequence. It has many other consequences. When you become energy independent, your foreign policy becomes, you retain your sovereignty, you can do things differently, your foreign policy, it has implications beyond just jobs. It has, and ultimately you could then export the energy to regional, neighboring countries, towards Afghanistan, Central Asia, and create a Eurasian energy grid, and Pakistan could ultimately come out of all this it could emerge within a decade or two to be the most powerful and most important leader of the Muslim world. Just as the oil boom caused the Gulf countries to become the most important leaders of the Muslim world after the fall of the Ottoman Empire.